Story 1. The Man in the Attic. We bought the house on pure impulse, an old, creaky Victorian tucked in through the forested hills of the outskirts of Franklin, Tennessee. My wife Sarah and I had only been married for 3 months, and the idea of restoring a character home together sounded romantic. The listing said fixer-upper, but we didn't know how generous that term was until we were in deep, peeling wallpaper, rewiring rooms, and sanding floors late into the night. It felt like an adventure, for a while. The first time we heard the scratching, it was maybe 10 days after we moved in. We were in bed, and it was late, a little bit after midnight. The sound came from the ceiling just above our bedroom. It wasn't loud, just persistent. Scrape, pause, scrape, pause. Like something or someone dragging nails across the floorboard overhead. Sarah sat up wide-eyed. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I nodded, pulling the covers back. It's probably just raccoons. She didn't answer. Her eyes stayed fixed on the ceiling, on the shadow above us that stretched long and low from our bedside lamp. I grabbed a flashlight and climbed the attic steps, trying to seem more confident than I felt. The old house creaked under every footstep, like it was complaining about my presence. When I reached the attic door and pulled it open, a rush of dry, cold air hit me in the face. The attic was unfinished, just beams and insulation, and it reeked of age, dust, dry rot, and something else that I couldn't quite place. I swept the light around, expecting glowing animal eyes or at least some kind of hole in the siding. But nothing. No raccoons, no squirrels, no nest of any kind. Still, I scattered some cayenne pepper along the baseboards and set a trap near the rafters. That night, Sarah didn't sleep well. Neither did I. But we told ourselves it was nothing, just an old house settling. Maybe mice. The usual new homeowner denial. And then the dreams started. Sarah had them the worst. Something about a man staring at her from the attic hatch while she slept, whispering her name over and over in a voice like wind moving through glass. She'd wake up breathless, sweating, her fingernails digging into my arm. I'd hold her and tell her it was just a dream. People had bad dreams in old houses, I said. All the new noises, the creaks, the stress. But in the morning, she'd be quiet, distant. Then came the journal. I found it when I was rewiring a light fixture and needed to run a cable through the attic. While I was crawling around the joist, I noticed a plank slightly lifted near a beam. Underneath was a gap in the insulation. Something was wedged into the space. I reached in and pulled it out. It was a small, leather-bound journal, brittle with age. The cover was stained dark in places. Some of the pages were stuck together, but most were intact, dated entries in elegant cursive handwriting. The journal belonged to a man named Thomas Greer. For the entries, I gathered he lived in the house in the early 1940s. The tone of the writing shifted over time, from mundane household complaints to darker, interesting paranoid rambles. He wrote of being watched, of someone living in the walls, of sounds no one else heard. The last entry was a mess of scattered old words, barely even legible. I hear him in the attic. Every now and then, I know what he is. I know. He's not dead. He's never left. I tried to seal him in, but he still breathes, still watches, still waits. I showed the journal to Sarah that night. She didn't laugh. She didn't roll her eyes. She just stared at the pages, and then at the ceiling. "We need to know what's up there," she said. That's when she suggested the baby monitor. We had one we'd bought on sale a month earlier, part of a someday preparation. It had audio and night vision capabilities. We weren't using it yet, but Sarah insisted that we place it in the attic, just to check. So we did. I climbed up the narrow steps and placed the monitor on a beam facing out towards the open attic floor. I turned it on and climbed back down. That night, we left the receiver on in our bedroom. It was quiet at first, just static, and then faint creaks, more static, the kind of background noise you'd expect from an old house. But then came the whispering. It was around 2:13 in the morning. I remembered that exactly. We both sat up at the same time, eyes wide. The monitor crackled softly. Then came a whisper, harsh and deliberate, right up against the mic. We couldn't make out the words, but it sounded wet, like someone speaking through a slit in their throat. And then silence. Then breathing. Not an animal, not the wind. Breathing. Heavy, like a human. I turned off the monitor. We didn't sleep the rest of the night. In the morning, I went back up. The monitor was still there, undisturbed. The attic was empty again. No raccoon, no birds, nothing. But now the fear wasn't vague anymore. It had shape, weight. We tried to convince ourselves we just imagined it. Maybe we picked up a neighbor's baby monitor on the same frequency. Maybe it was just a fluke. But deep down, we both knew that was bullshit. Sarah started sleeping with the bedroom light on. She began compulsively checking the attic door 3-4 times a night. I'd catch her staring at it like she was waiting for something to move. Then about a week later, she heard her name again, clear as day, whispered from the ceiling while she stood alone in the hallway. That was the breaking point. We called a friend of mine who worked in home restoration, just to see if maybe there were a crawl space or false walls in the attic that hadn't been found yet. When he came out, we walked him through the place. He tapped on walls and measured beams, then eventually asked us if we knew about the sealed crawl at the back of the attic. We didn't. He showed us. At the far end of the attic, behind some dislodged insulation, was a sheet of old plywood screwed into place. It looked haphazardly installed, like someone had slapped it up in a hurry. He asked if he wanted it removed. I hesitated, but Sarah nodded before I could answer. He pried it off. Behind it was a small, dark crawl space, just big enough for someone to lie down in. The air that came out was foul, like something rotten had been left in the dark for decades. Inside there was nothing at first glance, just dust, insulation, and old boards. But then we found bones, small ones, wrapped in an old sheet, tucked into the far corner of the space, and near them, a broken pair of reading glasses. We called the police. Everything after that became a blur. Crime scene tape, questions, officers going in and out. There was a forensic team. One of them confirmed the remains were human, male most likely. Probably there for 50 years. No ID, no wallet, just the bones and the glasses. Sarah and I stayed in a motel that night, and the next. By the end of the week, we decided we'd had enough. The romantic idea of a fixer-upper had been replaced with insomnia, fear, and the kind of silence that hums with tension. We listed the house, sold it at a loss. I never went back after we packed, but I kept the journal. Sometimes, I still flip through it, half hoping to find something that I'd missed. Some clue, some explanation. But all I find is paranoia, rambling dread. And for the last few entries that were never quite dated, scrawled on the inside back cover was one more line, almost hidden beneath the pages of old leather. He waits in the ceiling. He breathes through the walls. He whispers to anyone who will listen. I don't tell this story often. Not because I'm afraid of being believed, but because part of me still wonders what would have happened if we never set up that monitor, if we'd never gone digging, if we just let him stay up there, in the dark, where he'd belong. But I still dream about that attic, and the breathing that isn't mine, and a voice that keeps saying my wife's name, softer each time, like it hasn't forgotten, like it's still waiting. Story 2. The Watcher on the Highway. I've been driving trucks for almost 20 years. I've seen a lot. Weather that could kill a man, drunks trying to pass you on a one-way lane, and people throwing crap from an overpass, you name it. But nothing's ever rattled me like what happened in New Mexico. It was nearly November. I was hauling refrigeration units from Phoenix to Amarillo, the usual. It was around 2 a.m. That stretch of East Route 60, long, flat, and dark. No other lights for miles, except mine and the stars. My CB was quiet. No chatter, no traffic. I had the window cracked a little bit just to keep me awake. Cold air blowing in. The hum of the tires on the road underneath me. I remember seeing something on the side of the road just ahead. At first, I thought it was roadkill, or maybe some junk. But I got a little closer, and I realized it was a person. He was standing perfectly still, right at the edge of the hallway, tall and thin, wearing a long coat, and he looked like one of those heavy wool things from the 1950s. His face was pale, but not sickly, just off, like something was missing behind the skin. Normally, I don't pick up hitchhikers. Company policy says not to, liability reasons, but something about this guy, I don't know. He wasn't waving, trying to flag me down. He was just standing there, staring straight ahead. Without thinking much about it, I slowed down and stopped. I rolled the passenger window down and asked if he needed a ride. He didn't say a word. He just walked over, opened the door, and climbed in. Smooth, like he'd done this 1,000 times. "Where are you headed?" I asked. He didn't respond. I glanced over and he was sitting perfectly upright, hands folded in his lap, eyes locked on the road. He wasn't dirty, didn't smell of booze or piss like a lot of transients. He looked well kept, just quiet. "All right then," I muttered, pulled back onto the road. "You don't talk, I won't talk." About 5 minutes in, I tried again. "So, you from around here?" Nothing. I figured maybe he was mute or just didn't want to talk. That was fine. I wasn't looking for a conversation. It just felt a little uneasy. The longer he sat there, the more I realized I couldn't hear him breathe. I turned on the radio. Classic country. Figured maybe it'd break the tension, but the moment the music started, he turned his head towards me. Just his head. Not his body. His eyes. They were black. Not like dark brown black. I mean black. Like the pupils took up his whole eye. They had no light in them. No shine. They were just flat. I froze. "You alright, buddy?" I asked. He slowly turned his head back to the windshield. Then my dash cam screen flickered. I kept it mounted near the mirror. It's always recording. Part of the company's safety system. Usually, it displays the live feed, split between front and interior. But now, nothing but static. I reached up to tap it. Static. The rest of the unit. Still static. That's when the truck got cold. I don't mean chilly. I mean cold. Like the heater cut out, but it hadn't. I looked at the thermostat. It was still set at 73, but I could see my breath. That's when I really started to worry. I checked the mirrors. No headlights behind me. No cars. Nothing. Just open road and desert. I looked back at him. He hadn't moved. I thought about pulling over and telling him to get out, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. My gut was twisted in knots, but my hands wouldn't listen. Then he spoke. It was sudden, quiet, but clear. He said, "You shouldn't have stopped." And that's it. Nothing else. His voice didn't match his face. It was deep, like someone else speaking through him. I nearly slammed the brakes. I turned and said to him, "What the hell did you just say?" And he was gone. Just like that. That seat was empty. No door sound, no weight shift, just gone. The passenger door was still shut, window rolled up. I was going 65 miles an hour. There's no way in hell he could have just jumped or climbed out. I slammed the brakes hard, pulled off to the shoulder and sat there, trying to catch my breath. I got out and checked the truck, the passenger side, back of the cab, hell, even underneath. Nothing. No sign that anyone had ever been there. Then I opened the passenger door. That seat was cold as ice. I touched it and my hand stung, like I'd grabbed a frozen pipe. I climbed back in, I locked the door, and I sat there shaking. I didn't move for almost 20 minutes. Eventually, I started the engine again. The heat came on and the dash cam returned to normal, like nothing had ever happened. When I reached the next truck stop, I pulled in and parked under the lights. I went inside and grabbed some coffee. I must have looked like hell because the woman behind the counter asked me if I was okay. I didn't tell her everything, just said I saw something weird on the side of the road. She gave me a look and said, "You'd pick someone up, didn't you?" I stared at her and asked, "How the hell did you know that?" Happens around here sometimes. We call him the Watcher. Some say he's a ghost. Others say it's worse. What do you mean, worse? They've been stories for decades. Truckers mostly. He appears, gets in, and then disappears. The ones who see him, some of them wreck. Some don't even make it home. You're lucky. I asked her how far back the stories went. She said her grandfather told her about it when she was little. First sightings were in the 70s. Always the same stretch of road. Back at the truck, I pulled the dash cam footage. The moment he would have entered the cab, static. Not just fuzzy video. I mean dead air. From the second I stopped to the moment I slammed on the brakes, the feed was blank, and then it popped back like normal. I saved the file. I sent it to a friend of mine who works with our logistics office. He analyzed it and said it looked like the signal had corrupted, but he couldn't explain why it only affected those few moments. I didn't sleep that night. I drove straight into Amarillo with the radio off and the lights on full. When I got to the depot, I checked in and told the manager I wouldn't drive that stretch again. Ever. They thought I was joking. I wasn't. That was 3 years ago. I still drive, but I take the long way now, and 2 hours to avoid that part of New Mexico. I've only told this story a few times. Most people just roll their eyes. I say I wasn't hallucinating or tired. But hell, maybe I was. But hallucinations don't freeze truck seats. They don't kill dashcam feeds. And they sure as hell don't say, "You shouldn't have stopped." I looked up accident records lately. Over 50 fatal crashes on that exact same stretch of road in the last 50 years. All unexplained. No other vehicle. No cause of death in some cases. Just trucks or cars off the road. Wrecked. I used to think ghosts were a load of crap. But now, I don't know. there was something out there, something watching. So if you ever find yourself out on Route 60, east of Socorro, in the dead of night, and you see a man in an old coat just standing by the side of the road, keep driving. Whatever you do, don't stop. Story 3. The Screaming Tree. I was 12 the summer it happened. My parents had shipped me off to my grandparents' place in the middle of nowhere, North Carolina, for a few weeks while they took care of some business in D.C. I wasn't thrilled about it. My grandparents were kind people, but they didn't believe in video games or staying indoors. Their house sat on 10 acres of wooded land, way out in nowhere. The closest neighbor was a quarter mile down a dirt road. Cell signal was non-existent, and the old TV only picked up 2 channels on a good day. So I spent most of my time outside, wandering through the woods behind their house, pretending I was some kind of survivalist on a survival show. I had been out nearly every day, climbing trees, following animal tracks, and throwing rocks into the creek. But one afternoon, I took a different path, deeper into the woods than I had ever gone before. And that's where I found it. The tree. It was unlike anything around it. Everything else in the woods was lush and green. This tree was gnarled and blackened, twisted like it had been struck by lightning, but there was no burn marks. Just a sickly gray tone to the bark and branches that looked more like claws than limbs. I remember it didn't make any sounds. No leaves rustling, no birds. Even the bugs were quiet. It just stood there in a small clearing, dead, but somehow not. There was something about it that drew me in. A strange pull, like I'd had to leave something behind. So I pulled out my pocket knife my grandpa gave me and carved my initials into the bark. TM. I pressed harder than I meant to. The wood was softer than I expected. It was almost wet. That night, back at the house, everything felt off. My grandparents were watching the TV in the den. I went to bed early, worn out from the hike. It was dead quiet outside. No wind, no crickets, just that kind of silence that makes your ears ring. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of a scream. Not like a person yelling. I mean a scream. High-pitched and furious. The whole house shook. Glass rattled in the windows. The scream sounded like it was coming from outside. No, from all around. I sat up, heart pounding. I didn't scream, didn't call for my grandparents. I just froze. And then the scream stopped, cut off mid-howl, like someone had yanked a cord. I laid back down, eyes wide, staring at the ceiling. After a while, I drifted off. The next morning, I woke up with a sharp, stinging pain on my left arm. I pulled up my sleeve and nearly screamed. There were deep scratches, running from my shoulder to my wrist. 4 perfect lines. Not random. Not like I'd rolled over onto something sharp. They looked just like the marks a branch would leave if it ran across your skin. I ran into the bathroom and tried to clean them, but they were already scabbed over, still fresh. I showed them to my grandparents. They asked me if I fell or had gotten into the briars. I told them I didn't know, which was true. I didn't. Later that day, I wandered out onto the porch. That's when old Mr. Hanley pulled up in a rusted pickup. He was their neighbor, the only one for miles. He was in his late 70s, wiry and tan with deep creases in his face. He got out holding a bag of tomatoes for my grandpa, but stopped cold when he saw me. "You all right, son?" "Yes, sir," I said, hiding my arm. He squinted at me. You been out past the ridge? Past where the creek bends? I nodded. I found a weird tree yesterday. It looked kinda dead. His face went pale. You carved into it. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. He saw the truth in my eyes. He took off his cap and let out a long breath. That tree's cursed, boy. You shouldn't have gone near it, much less scarred it. I didn't know what to say. That's the hanging tree, he said. Woman hung herself there, long time ago, back in the Civil War days. He looked me dead in the eyes. She screams when her grave's disturbed. My throat went dry. What do I do? He didn't answer at first, just stared out towards the woods. You didn't bleed on it, did you? No, sir. He seemed to relax a bit. Then you might be okay. But don't go back. Ever. Stay out of that part of the woods. And don't dream of carving. Stay out of that part of the woods. And don't dream about carving anything else. That tree doesn't forget. I nodded, heart pounding. That night, I stayed up late, too afraid to sleep. But eventually my eyes shut, and I drifted off. And then I heard her. Not screaming this time, crying, soft, mournful sobs coming from outside of my window. I stayed in bed, every muscle locked. After maybe 30 minutes, it stopped. In the morning, I checked outside. There were muddy footprints leading up to my window, bare feet. Small, like a woman's, but there had been no rain, no water, just dust and dead leaves. I didn't go into those woods again. When my parents picked me up a week later, I said nothing about the tree or the scream. I barely even said goodbye to my grandparents. I just wanted to get the hell out of there. But the scratches stayed with me. They faded, sure, but they left faint scars. I still have them. Years later, in college, I went back through some local archives for a class project. Just curiosity, I guess. I found an article, old and yellowed, from 1864. A woman named Eleanor Riggs had been accused of witchcraft by local soldiers. Said she had cursed their unit. Said her husband fought and died for the North, and she didn't belong in a town that supported the Confederacy. She was found hanging from a twisted tree behind her property. They ruled it a suicide. The article said her grave was left unmarked, unclaimed. Locals called the tree cursed. A few decades later, a young girl vanished near that same spot. They never found her. I closed the book and walked out of the library. I never finished that project, and I didn't tell my professor why. I never went back to that house. My grandparents had passed years ago. The property was sold off, but sometimes late at night, I still hear that scream in my dreams. Not angry, not mournful, just hungry. Story 4. Something watched us from the mesa. I'm not going to tell you my real name. Not because I'm scared of being found by a person. What I saw out there wasn't human. This happened in the fall of 2016. I was 24 at the time, working with a wildlife mitigation crew contracted by the state. A buddy of mine, Ryan, he had got me the job. We were clearing dead trees near the ridgeline just west of the mesa, remote country. No cell reception and no towns for miles. Just vast stretch of desert, brush, and towering pines. That week, our crew had been pulling double shifts. We were camping on site because it made no sense to drive back and forth every single night. There were 6 of us total. We had 3 tents set up in a flat clearing near an old ATV trail, the kind that's barely more than a scar in the dust. The locals told us not to camp too close to the mesa, and our foreman, an older Navajo guy named Rick, took that advice seriously. He grew up out there, called the mesa a place with rules. We didn't press him. He was kind of a guy who didn't share unless he had to. The third night is when things got weird. We just finished eating and were sitting around the fire. The air was cold, but still. No wind and no sound. It was unsettling in a way you don't notice unless it's too quiet for too long. There's no animals, no owls, no bugs, just silence around the crackling of our fire. Rick was staring off towards the mesa, chewing sunflower seeds like he always did. That's when Ryan nudged me and whispered, "You see that?" At first I didn't, and then it moved. About 50 yards up the slope, between two pinyon pines, something crouched low. At first, I thought it was a coyote or maybe a wolf, but it was big, like really big. It had this low, unnatural gait, like its limbs bent the wrong way. Even from that distance, I could see it was covered in coarse, dark fur, but it wasn't shaped like any animal I'd ever seen. The head was wrong, like a wolf's snout, but the eyes were too far facing forward, like a person's, and they didn't reflect red or white when the campfire caught them. They just absorbed it. Ryan stood up, and that must have triggered something because that thing jerked its head like it noticed us all at once, and then it bolted. Not away, but around the edge of the clearing, super fast. We all jumped up, even Rick. The fire popped. I remember someone swearing. I turned to Rick, and for the first time ever, that man looked terrified. He didn't say a word. He just grabbed his flashlight. No one leaves this circle. We didn't sleep that night. Rick sat cross-legged with his back to the fire, eyes scanning the dark. The rest of us whispered about what we saw, trying to rationalize it. A sick wolf, maybe. A mountain lion with mange. But deep down, I think we all knew what that wasn't. The next morning, Rick pulled us aside before we started our shift. He told us there were stories passed down in his family about skinwalkers. People who've taken dark medicine. Not just legends, he said. Real. And they don't like outsiders. You see one, he told us. It's already chosen you. I asked what that meant, and he didn't answer. That day we kept to the job, cutting and hauling wood, but no one wandered off alone. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. You ever feel your skin get cold in the sun, like something standing behind you that shouldn't have been there? That was all day. Later, while I was working down at the edge of the tree line with another guy, we found tracks. They weren't deer or elk, and definitely not bear. They were human, but wrong. Barefoot, elongated, and the toes seemed way too long. They were almost dog-like. It was like they changed shape mid-stride. We flagged them for Rick. He took one look and pulled us back to camp early. That night was worse. Around midnight, we heard it. Something heavy, pacing just beyond the firelight. Sometimes closer, sometimes further. Branches would snap. Gravel shifted. We'd hear breathing. Deep, raspy breathing. But every time we shine a light over there, nothing. And then Ryan screamed. We turned to see him standing frozen near his tent, pale as a corpse. His sleeping bag had been dragged 10 feet from his tent and laid out perfectly. Not thrown or kicked. Placed. Inside it, there was something slick, wet. It was a deer heart, still warm. We packed up before dawn. Rick said nothing the whole ride back. I haven't been back to the Uinta Mesa since. I don't plan to. Ryan moved to Oregon 6 months later. We don't talk about it. We don't go camping anymore either. Some things out there don't care if you believe in them or not, because they believe in you. Story 4. The Grave Sleeper. This happened back in 2015, when I was between 2 jobs and desperate for anything that would keep gas in my tank. A buddy of mine from high school knew a guy who ran a rural cemetery in western Pennsylvania. It was a small space, maybe 300 plots total, surrounded by woods on all sides. The job was simple. The regular groundskeeper had a stroke and was out for a few months, so they needed someone to mow the grass and trim the hedges to keep the place clean. It was $200 a week, and I got to use the trailer on site. I said yes before I even asked questions. The cemetery was quiet, maybe a little too quiet. It sat on the edge of an old gravel road that wasn't connected to anything else, just trees and silence. No traffic, no nearby houses. The only noise that I ever heard came from birds during the day and coyotes at night. It was peaceful at first. I mowed every Tuesday and checked for damage after storms, and I mostly just read books on the porch. But then came the night I found the first one. I had gotten back from a grocery run and was pulling up to the trailer steps when I saw movement out by the headstones. It was nearly dark, sun below the tree line, but not quite night yet. At first, I thought it was a deer, but then I saw a shape move across a row of graves and then stop. A person. Standing still. No flashlight, no dog, no car. Just a figure in the middle of the cemetery, facing away from me. I called out, "We're closed after dusk. Can I help you?" There's no answer. I stepped up the porch to get a better look. Whoever it was had long, dark hair and was wearing like a pale dress or a robe, and still not moving, just staring at one of the headstones. I got within maybe 20 feet before I called out again. "Hey, are you alright?" She turned her head, and that's when I noticed something was wrong with her face. It looked soft, like melted wax, or someone had covered her features with plastic wrap. I'd stopped walking. She didn't speak. She didn't move. Then I blinked and she was gone. Gone. Not walking, not running, just gone. I stood there like an idiot for a full minute, scanning every corner of the grounds. Nothing. No sound, no footsteps. I'd walked over to where she had been standing. The headphone that she'd been looking at was a girl named Rebecca Ellis, born 1919, and died in 1936. She was 17 years old. The next morning, I checked in with the owner. I didn't tell him exactly what I saw, just that someone was lurking in the cemetery after dark. He looked annoyed more than anything. Probably just some kids playing a trick, he said. It happens sometimes. But there were no kids, no houses, and no neighbors for miles. Later that week, I noticed something strange near Rebecca's grave. A depression in the soil. Not a sinkhole, not an animal dig. It looked like the dirt had been disturbed and then settled again, like someone had gotten out. I didn't report that part. That night, around 2:30 in the morning, I woke up to a sound outside of my trailer. It was faint, but I could hear it clearly through the screen window. Shuffling, like bare feet dragging across gravel. I froze in my bed. The sound circled the trailer once. Slow, dragging footsteps. Not hurrying, not sneaking. Just pacing around like whoever it was knew I could hear them. I stayed in bed, eyes open, heart pounding for what felt like an hour. Eventually, The noise stopped. The next morning, I found faint footprints in the dirt around the trailer. Small, barefoot, but definitely human. I looked out toward the cemetery. Rebecca's grave had sunk deeper. Now I was scared. The next few nights were the same. Around 2 or 3 in the morning, the dragging footsteps would start. Sometimes a knock at the trailer wall. Once, I swear, I heard someone whispering right outside of my window, but when I sat up to look out there was no one there. I didn't sleep much after that. The one night I finally saw her again, I woke up and looked out the window. The cemetery was barely lit by the moonlight, but there she was, standing next to the same grave, Rebecca's. Except this time, she was looking at me. Her face was no clearer than before, still smooth like it was covered with wet gauze. Her arms hung straight at her side. She didn't move, but I felt like she was daring me to come out. I stayed inside. The next morning, I found something leaning against my trailer door. A piece of wood. Old and splintered, weather-worn. It was a broken grave marker. Etched into the side were the letters R.E. Rebecca Ellis. I returned it to her grave and placed it at the foot of her headstone. That night, no footsteps, no knocks, silence. I thought maybe it was over. Maybe I'd made peace with something I didn't understand. But I was wrong. On my final night working there, I'd packed up early. I decided not to stay one more night. I was done. That job didn't pay enough to live with whatever the hell that was. Just after dusk, I stepped out for one last look. The moon was full and everything was still. I looked towards Rebecca's grave. The headstone was gone. Not broken. Not knocked over. Gone. I walked out, flashlight in hand, and when I reached that spot, I froze. The soil had been dug up, again, but this time, it wasn't sunken. It was raised, like something was trying to get back in. I turned to leave, and that's when I saw her, right behind me, closer than ever before, no more than 6 feet away, face still smooth, arms outreached. She let out a sound, dry and breathless, like someone exhaling through water. I ran, full sprint. I didn't stop until I was in the truck and flying down that gravel road, trailer still lit up behind me like a beacon. I didn't go back for my last paycheck. Didn't ask for a reference. I moved 2 states away and I changed my number. Now, every once in a while, usually around the anniversary of that night, I'll wake up at 2:30 a.m. and think I hear it again. That slow, dragging sound outside my window. The bare feet of someone who never fully went back into the ground. Story 6. Voices from apartment 203. I moved into my first apartment in Chicago during my sophomore year of college. It wasn't fancy, just a cramped studio in a 3-story brick building near the Blue Line. Rent was cheap, the heat worked, and it was close to campus. That's all I cared about. At first, it was great. It was a little quiet, maybe too quiet, but I chalked that up to respectful neighbors. The first weird thing happened the day I moved in. There was a stack of mail already on the counter. Most of it addressed to someone named Monica L. West. She'd clearly lived there before me. Nothing strange about it except the mail kept coming. Not just junk mail either. Birthday cards, handwritten envelopes, a padded package with no return address. The landlord said Monica had moved out a couple years earlier. She was a good tenant and paid on time, he told me, and then added, offhandedly, shame how it ended. I didn't ask what he meant, I should have. About 2 weeks after moving in, I started hearing things through the walls. It always happened late, around 2 or 3 in the morning. I'd be laying in bed, scrolling on my phone when I'd hear a soft thudding, then crying, faint but steady, like someone trying to muffle sobs into a pillow. I assumed it was the next door neighbor. My unit was 202, so that would have meant it was apartment 203. But the crying didn't sound like it was coming from a specific direction. It was more like it was in the walls, like it traveled through the pipes or the vents. After 3 or 4 nights of this, I finally knocked on the door of 302. No one answered. I knocked harder. Nothing. A man coming up the stairs saw me and said, "You looking for someone in there?" I nodded. "Yeah, whoever lives here in 203. I think they've been crying at night." The man looked at the door, and then at me. "No one lives there. Hasn't for a while. That unit's been sealed off since." He caught himself, then just said, "Management doesn't rent it out anymore." The next night, the crying got louder. I tried to drown it out with headphones, but the sound wasn't just emotional. It was urgent, desperate. I got the sense that someone was trying to communicate, not just weep. That night, I had a dream. At least, I think it was a dream. I woke up around 3:30 in the morning, feeling like I was being watched. The apartment was cold, colder than it had any right to be. I sat up in bed and saw a figure at the foot of it. A woman, thin, pale, and her face was damp with tears. Her hair was hanging in front of her eyes. She was mouthing something. No sound came out, just the shape of words, over and over again. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. My body felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Then, just suddenly, as she appeared, she was gone. I told myself it was sleep paralysis, maybe even stress. Midterms were coming up. I was sleep deprived, but the next night, I went to bed with my phone recording on the nightstand, just in case. The next morning, I played back the audio. For the first few hours, it was nothing but ambient noises. But around 3:32 a.m., I heard it. A whisper. "Get out." My heart stopped. I played it again. Same thing. "Get out." I emailed the landlord. Asked him point blank what happened in apartment 203. No response. So I went back to building records at City Hall. I figured I'd find an old lease or maybe a sale notice. Instead, I found a death certificate. Monica L. West, age 26, found deceased in apartment 203 in 2020. Cause of death? Suicide by overdose. Neighbors reported the smell after several days. She had been dead alone in that apartment for nearly a week before anyone noticed. The padded envelope that had arrived for her a few days earlier was still sitting on my counter. That night, I decided to leave. I packed a bag and went to stay with a friend. When I came back the next morning to get the rest of my things, that package was gone. No sign it had ever been there. But the apartment smelled like cheap perfume, faint, like someone had just walked out. I moved out a week later. I broke my lease and forfeited my deposit. I didn't care. I just wanted out. Sometimes, when I'm walking to class, I catch myself glancing up at that window of my old apartment. But not mine exactly. Hers. Apartment 203. And sometimes, I swear she looks back. Story number 7. The Whispering Schoolhouse, My name is Carol Bishop. I'm 29, and last fall, I took a teaching position in a tiny rural town in North Texas. One of those towns that doesn't even have a stoplight, just a gas station, a diner, and a post office that looked like it had been abandoned since 1970. I taught in Dallas for 6 years, but after a messy breakup and the death of my mom, I wanted to restart. Something quiet, peaceful. When I got offered a third grade position at Briar Glen Elementary, I packed up my apartment and moved out there without hesitation. The school had just reopened after being closed for nearly a decade. Apparently, there had been some asbestos issues in the wall or something that required long-term renovation. The school board finally got the funds to bring it up to code, and I'd be one of just 4 teachers on staff. It was small, maybe 80 students total, but the building was beautiful in a haunting old Texas kind of way. Think limestone foundation, red brick walls, wooden beams along the hallway, and a massive clock tower that hadn't worked in decades. It looked like a church that had been rebranded as a school, and I loved it. At first. The whisper started my second week. I stayed late on a Tuesday grading spelling tests in my classroom, room 2C. It was well after 6 p.m., and the janitor had already left. I had my door propped open and was listening to music through my laptop when I heard something soft, like a child's voice. I paused the music thinking maybe someone had come in the back, one of the other teachers, or maybe a parent. But the hallway was empty. Then I heard it again. A whisper, just barely audible. I stood in the hallway, holding my breath. It was coming from further down the hall, near the old art room that hadn't been reopened yet. I said hello. No response. I checked every room in that wing. Nothing. Empty classrooms, locked doors, and dust on the floor. It freaked me out a little, but I chalked it up to wind through old vents or maybe my imagination running wild. The school was nearly 100 years old, after all. Still, I went home and left the lights on that night. The next Monday, something even stranger happened. I was writing the day's schedule on the chalkboard and noticed faint marks in the corner that I hadn't made. It looked like stick figures, at least a dozen of them, all drawn in white chalk, hanging from crooked little trees. At first, I assumed one of my students had done it during free time the previous Friday, and I just hadn't noticed. Kids get weird with their drawings. I wiped it away with a damp rag and went on with my morning. That afternoon, I caught myself staring at the board again. Something felt off. I crouched down and noticed tiny handwriting along the bottom edge of the board, so small that I had to squint to read it. Lucy, Caleb, Daniel, Sarah, Will. 5 names, but none of them were in my class. I didn't tell anyone about it. Part of me was afraid it was just a prank, and I didn't want to look stupid or superstitious. But the names stayed with me. They didn't feel random. The next incident was worse. 2 weeks later, I stayed after school again to organize a parent-teacher conference. It was close to 7:30 p.m., already dark, and I was the last person in the building. I heard the whispers, again, louder this time. I couldn't make out full sentences, just fragments. She sees us. Don't go. It hurts. I swear to you, the temperature in my room dropped 10 degrees. My fingers stiffened. My eyes started to water, and I couldn't move. It felt like something was in the room with me. Not watching, surrounding. Then, every light in the hallway flickered and went out, all at once. Only my classroom stayed on. I grabbed my things and ran. I didn't lock up. I just got in my car and drove 15 minutes back to my rental house in silence. That night, I Googled everything I could about Briar Glen Elementary, and that's when I found out about the fire. In 1936, Briar Glen caught fire after a gas leak in the cafeteria. It was the original schoolhouse on that land. At the time, it had no alarms and no sprinkler system. 17 children died, along with one teacher and a janitor. The fire moved fast and collapsed the roof within minutes. The students were trapped inside. Some of them were found piled up at the rear exit, which had jammed shut. Locals were so traumatized, they tore the whole structure down and eventually rebuilt the school over the same foundation. It was rebuilt twice since then, but the land never changed. Neither had the pain. I scrolled through the list of names: Lucy, Caleb, Daniel, Sarah, Will. The exact 5 names that were written on my chalkboard. I wanted to leave, and I thought about quitting and breaking my lease to move back to the city. But something made me stay. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe I felt like those kids were stuck, and I was the only one that was hearing them. So I started writing things down. Whispered phrases, the time of day, classroom temperature, which chalk would smear and which wouldn't. I even left a voice recorder running in my desk drawer overnight. When I played it back the next morning, I caught a sound that shook me to the core. It was the sound of a match striking, and then children screaming, muffled, distant, but unmistakable. I sent the audio to my brother, who works in sound design for a video game company. He cleaned it up and removed the ambient hiss. He sent me a message that said, "This isn't a hoax. This is real. What the hell is going on in that school?" Things got worse from there. One of the other teachers, Miss Halstead, who'd been there for decades, pulled me aside and said that she'd seen me looking nervous. She told me the school has always been touched. That's the word she used, touched. She said the janitor in the 80s quit after seeing children's handprints appear on the inside of a mop bucket. A former principal hung a crucifix in every hallway. I asked her why she stayed. She said, "Someone has to be kind to them. They're still in pain." That night, I left a piece of chalk on the board tray and wrote, "What do you want?" The next morning, under it, in tiny childlike handwriting, someone had written, "To be remembered." I didn't sleep for a week. Eventually, I brought in flowers, left them at the base of the clock tower, where the names of the fire victims had once been etched into the limestone before being plastered over. I traced their names on paper from the archives and made a small bulletin board tribute in the teacher's lounge. Nothing big, just a quiet remembrance. Since then, the whispers have softened. They still happen, but they're not angry anymore. Once, I even heard a voice say, "Thank you." I don't tell my students anything about this. I don't want them to be scared, but I keep a candle on my desk that I never light, just to make the room feel warmer. I leave the window cracked even in the winter, because I like to think the breeze carries our voices away when they get too loud. I stayed, because I think someone needs to be listening, even to ghosts.